This video, we are going to be talking about the process of fermentation. Fermentation is something that cells can do when there is a low amount of oxygen or even no oxygen. And why do I have these pictures here? Well, fermentation is an extremely important process when it comes to making things like pickles, alcoholic beverages, and kimchi, all those fermented foods, yogurt. So fermentation is not only great for, the survival of an organism, but it is also great for us because we can produce amazing types of food through fermentation. So let's talk about why fermentation happens. So if you recall from other videos, I talked about the electron transport chain and how the electron transport chain requires oxygen to perform, right? So the electron transport chain needs oxygen at the very last step when those low energy electrons are, at the end of the chain. We need to get rid of those electrons, and oxygen and hydrogen pick them up to produce water. So oxygen is an extremely important part of the electron transport chain. So without oxygen, we don't have an electron transport chain. The electron transport chain does not work. And what ends up happening is there's going to be a buildup of NADH and FADH2 in the cell. And that is going to be problematic because, these molecules don't have anywhere to go, and they're just carrying these high energy electrons. Not only that, because of how much buildup of NADH and FADH2 there is, the decarboxylation steps actually stop as well. So even though oxygen is not directly required for decarboxylation, because the electron transport chain is not functional, it actually causes a backup, and all of the decarboxylation steps don't occur either. So now the cell is going to be in a state of crisis because it can't produce energy. Remember that both of these processes produce energy. And so we're basically just stuck in glycolysis. The only thing we can do is glycolysis over and over and over again to generate a measly amount of ATP, but at least it's enough to survive. And so fermentation is what the cell has to do to allow glycolysis to keep going without the other two steps available. So one type of fermentation is called lactic acid fermentation. Again, without oxygen, the only thing we have is glycolysis. So we go through a glycolysis, we make 2 ATP. I know it's not a lot, but it is what it is. Now, when we go through glycolysis, we are producing NADH, and we're going to be running out of NAD+. Now, this becomes an issue because once we have too many NADHs, we also can't go through glycolysis. And if we can't go through glycolysis, we die. So what the cell does is it gets pyruvate, which is produced at the end of glycolysis, and it converts it to lactate or lactic acid. They're interchangeable. Anyway, so lactic acid is produced, and in the process, we are also converting NADH back to NAD+. Now, that's really important because NAD+ allows glycolysis to continue going, and that's how we keep generating energy, by just doing glycolysis over and over and over again. But we have to also convert our pyruvate to lactate so we can replenish our NAD+. So that is basically the whole reason why we do lactic acid fermentation. This, by the way, happens in our bodies all the time. When you are exercising, obviously when you exercise, you breathe really quickly, but you just simply cannot get oxygen to every cell in your body when you are exercising. And so your muscle cells, because they are, using tons of energy, a lot of your muscle cells will go into lactic acid fermentation, and that is the burn that you feel. So this lactic acid builds up in your muscles, and you literally feel it burning. And so that is a form of fermentation that we do in our bodies. Again, when there is no oxygen, or if there is low amounts of oxygen. And again, we are just doing this. We're kind of sacrificing the pyruvate to allow glycolysis to continue over and over and over again. Now, there is a different type of fermentation. It is called alcohol fermentation. This happens in certain types of microbes like yeast, where they have a different way of doing it. So their pyruvic acid is going to be decarboxylated into acetaldehyde. And so this CO2 is released by these organisms. And then the acetaldehyde is going to be converted to ethanol. Now, this conversion of acetaldehyde to ethanol also uses up NADH, so that NADH becomes NAD plus, which again, this is the key here. We want to generate more NAD plus so we can keep doing glycolysis. And so this is just another version of fermentation that specifically microbes like yeast can do. And obviously, this is the type of fermentation that we use to produce wine and beer and other alcoholic beverages. But again, the whole point of fermentation is to replenish the NAD plus so that glycolysis can continue. Now, the two fermentation types that I talked about are the two most common, but there are definitely other types of fermentation pathways. Mainly microbes, different types of microbes can do them. In humans and most, animals, we're going to be doing lactic acid fermentation. And then yeast is going to be the primary one for alcohol fermentation, but there are definitely other types of fermentation. I'm not going to go over it, but different types of bacteria do different types of fermentation, which gives us different types of food products like cheese or yogurt, etc. So hopefully this video was fun and interesting. I will see you in the next video.